So I spelled xylophone in three different ways. And then in parentheses, I told the proctor, I'm so sorry. I do not understand, or I do not know how to spell this word, but I'm hoping you understand the concept of what I'm trying to say here. And that was it. And I realized that xylophone, I spelled it three different ways, all starting with a Z. And when I left the exam, no, it was not even close.
Hi, everyone, and welcome today. What I wanted to do is talk about spelling because there actually is a lot involved with spelling, and believe it or not, it makes us into better readers. So I thought that Alex and I would talk about the subject, share some of her experiences, my experiences, and so forth. So as I said before, welcome everyone, and let's get started. Hello, Alex.
Hello.
So, the spelling, right? It's a lot more complicated, and there's been an opinion or kind of a belief, shall we say, in the past couple of decades that technology can solve all of our spelling needs, and spelling is no longer necessary. It's gone the way of the horse and buggy. And I disagree.
And I have to add on to that where I will say I am a fan of technology's use and everything like that. But sometimes when you're in a meeting and you just have to take notes really quickly, or you're writing in front of your boss, really not knowing how to spell is so embarrassing sometimes.
And you know what? That's super fair. And it just goes to show that we will be in instances where technology isn't always readily available for that. So, where do we want to start? Do we want to start with a little bit of a discussion about why, like what is happening in the brain with spelling? Or do you want to share some of your stories? And then we can go into some of the learning and theories behind it.
I think what we can do is we can definitely start off with the topic of spelling from your perspective and learning more about it. And then I think we can definitely get into some of my horror stories or really just hilarious stories about my spelling mistakes that just have happened throughout my whole life. And it's one of those things where you learn to live with it and you're like, let's roll with it.
There we go. All right. So there's been a lot of knowledge and kind of a shifting of perception. And I really want to say, talk about technology. One of the things that has been fundamental to help us understand what goes on in the brain are functional MRIs, right? Prior to that, we couldn't really map out what was going on in the brain because in order to see it, you'd have to kill the person. Well, that kind of defeats brain activity. So that it wasn't working. Right. But then, lo and behold, we started mapping out. And when I say we, it's not the royal we, because I have nothing to do with it. All I have done is read about a lot of the work and amazing work that has been done with the functional MRI to really understand what's happening in the brain when we're reading and so forth. And Mark Seidenberg, it came up with what's called the eternal triangle, right? And it's a three-part series, hence the triangle. And what it is that the three elements that are constantly involved with reading include sounds, mhm, the spelling, and the third one is meaning. And what happens is that it's actually almost simultaneous, that it's occurring consistently. So when we're reading a word or we're seeing and we're decoding a word, it's a combination of, okay, those letters and then these sounds and kind of who can get the answer faster. Right. And then it also then goes into meaning so that we can differentiate between two, and two, and which one is the appropriate meaning. And it isn't that we pass the ball over the wall. It's that it's all happening simultaneously. And that's part of the reason that spelling is so critical because it's its own area of the brain that works with, excuse me, that works with reading and happens simultaneously. And either we never knew that, and it's only now that we're beginning to understand the importance. And that's why technology alone isn't going to work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that definitely makes sense. I definitely did not read any of the studies into it. I just know from, I think, my own personal experience with the reading and the spelling and how they are related to each other and how they do equate to each other to a certain
Right.
extent. And so I think also reading is so fundamental in order to understand how to spell words. And it's something that I've never ever realized until I got much older when I started reading more difficult words. And I'm like, oh, what is that word? And I'm like, oh, that's did not ever think it was spelled like that.
And part of the issue is English is not a transparent language. And we can talk about the transparency of languages. So, for example, we have 26 letters, but those 26 letters then make phone, it's 44 sounds, right? So we combine them in different ways. But when we're talking about spelling, what we're talking about is 75 different possibilities to make the sounds. So, what we have to do with spelling is we have to learn all the different ways that we can spell something and make that sound. And English has quite a few of them for that. So, it seems
Yeah,
like
and sorry, something I'll just quickly add on there is that right now I'm currently in Italy, based in Italy, and some of my job requires me to speak Italian. And learning Italian, I've been here for now 5 years. Um, in my opinion, is it's a much easier language to spell. And it's because whatever word you're saying, it's truly written the way pronounce it. And it's just like something for me that was just truly mind boggling. I was like, wow, it's so much easier. I'm not struggling necessarily in the same way. So I don't know if you can talk about that a little bit more because I was always really curious on why is that.
absolutely. And so, in fact, different languages are more transparent than another. And we call transparency if the way that you make a sound is easier. There are fewer combinations to make that sound. And just as you said with Italian, it's basically a one to one relationship. So if I hear a certain sound, I'm going to spell it a certain way. Unfortunately, English is not. It's almost the polar opposite, and it's one of the least transparent languages. So, there, like I was saying, those 75 different combinations, it just comes to mind. And this is with regular spelling. If I want to say the sound A, then I have the letter A in an open syllable. I have a consonant E, the magic E that kicks back and makes the vowel long. You remember that.
Yeah.
And I also have digraph AY, which I'm going to use when it's at the end of a word. Now, those are three possibilities depending upon where it is located in the word. And there are rules, and you just learn the rules. But in schools, we've kind of forgotten to teach the rules. And I think that that's one issue that we can kind of talk about. Do you remember when in elementary school you had spelling lists and everything else? Why
Oh,
don't you?
yeah, I can definitely share about this. So, the first thing that I'll say is that truly, I don't remember ever being educated on spelling in the sense of like, this is how you pronounce the word, this is the sound that it would make. That was just not part of my education. And it's not to say that that's like a horrible thing. It's just, I don't think at the time we were necessarily educated on the values that that brings to the table and for dyslexics as well. Reflecting back on it, I think I definitely would have appreciated it, but that's besides the point. But jumping into spelling, so I remember, and I think it was in third or fourth grade, we would have these weekly spelling tests. And, all of us were in like different levels. I was definitely in the below average or average level. And we would be given 20 words at the beginning of the week that we had to learn how to spell. And that was torture. I mean,
Why?
I
Why?
remember just not being able to do it. And I remember us just sitting down and you trying to teach me how to spell it and me just not registering it or being completely like shutting down for it, saying, I don't want to do this. It's too complicated. And I remember that one of the few ways that I was able to remember was just the mere practicing and full memorization and just writing it down 20 times, each word in a list, the pure repetition. But it was torture doing that. And I remember I hated it. I would just try and cheat the system as much as I could. And I was a really cute kid. So I think my favorite was when I would take a spelling test. And I'm not sure you know this, Mom. So we're going to have a little
Okay. All
coming out
right.
right
All right.
now. And I would do really, really bad. I would tell my teacher, because we were all on computers by then, oh, I just finished and something happened and the computer froze and I don't want to do it again. And he would be like, oh, no worries, Alex. What was your grade? And I knew that I shouldn't say a perfect 100 because I'd be a little suspicious. So I would always say, oh, I got one wrong or I got two wrongs. I'm really disappointed about that. And that was it. And I was like, thank the Lord I'm cute and I can get away with this because I know when I'm older, I will not be able to. And that was really how it's horrible to say, but that's how I gamed the system.
Right.
So there was my
For
little coming
some.
out, Mom.
All right. Thank you. We won't make this a lecture about honesty, the values, character, or any of those things. We'll just keep it to spelling and how not knowing the rules then. Well, it was a combination, I think, of the spelling the way it's normally taught in school that maybe works for the average student does not work at all for someone who is dyslexic, a struggling speller, or doesn't know the rules. And that really is what it comes down to.
Yeah, and I would really agree with that. I mean, I just think, at least for me in my scenario, maybe knowing the rules and being taught the rules would have really changed the game. But sitting there, and I think really how I learned how to spell was just pure memorization of each word.
Right. And those, in the third grade were the easier words and so forth. So you can kind of you can manage to memorize some of them and so forth. And let's just say that with now being OG trained, then there were so many more things I would have done differently. We would have made it multisensory. I would have had you moving your arm and spelling them. I would have had you saying the words and walking around. We would have been learning the rules and the sounds that each of the letter makes so that you could narrow down the possibilities. And then also another thing would be sometimes, as we talked about in that triangle, we can kind of teach the brain to remember phonetically how we spell a word for that. And in fact, that probably brings us into the 11th grade story.
Yeah, so basically, I think what really would have made a difference is had I learned this in elementary school, I wouldn't have as many amazing stories
Yeah, there
in
you go.
high school to share with you guys. But for me, I think it was so funny. We were in the 11th grade, or I was in the 11th grade, and I was in a class called Theory of Knowledge.
Mm.
I loved that class. It was really, we would just debate about concepts, and there wasn't really like a right or wrong answer. in any way. And my teacher for this class, they were also dyslexic. And so, that also allowed for, a lot of debate on, how does the brain work and blah, blah, blah. And so I remember one time we were in class. It was just me and him because I needed to finish one of my essays. And he was working on his next lecture and blah, blah, blah. And he goes, "How do you spell paradigm?" And I was like, I have no clue. So we managed to spend the next 15 minutes trying to figure out how to spell paradigm. But whenever we would see a word like paradigm, we were like, no, that's not the right word. That's paradigm. We need paradigm. And so I remember we went into circles until my sister, she was also in the class, and she came in and she was like, guys, this is how you spell the word. And I remember us being shocked that we had just wasted so much time on this trying to figure it out. And it was so embarrassing. And you could see it on his face. You could definitely see it on my face. And yeah, and that was one of my favorite stories. Like just these little moments that would happen. Or also, one of my favorite stories was when I was in my IB music exam,
Mhm.
and what the exam was like is that you would have to listen to a piece, you would have to break down the composition, what you thought about it. You would also have to break down what are some instruments that you're hearing in the background and what does that mean for the piece, the style, blah, blah, blah. And so I swear I heard a xylophone. Now, that one was a very ambiguous word to jump on and try and spell. And I remember, and I couldn't ask, my teacher, hey, or I couldn't go online and be like, how do you spell xylophone? And it was a handwritten exam and we were timed. And I knew that time for me was gold and I couldn't waste it. So I spelled xylophone in three different ways. And then in parentheses, I told the proctor, I'm so sorry. I do not understand, or I do not know how to spell this word. Um, but I'm hoping you understand the concept of what I'm trying to say here. And that was it. And I realized that xylophone, I spelled it three different ways, all starting with a Z. And when I left the exam, nope, was not even close. And I just remembered feeling so mortified, but also at the same time, feeling like, well, I'm so happy I am never going to have to meet this proctor. Because these moments are embarrassing. They're really embarrassing.
Right, absolutely. And it's the more advanced words or challenging words for spelling that definitely trip us up for that. And one of the things that we can do is when mapping it to the brain, we can kind of map it phonologically, like how we would pronounce it, even though that's not how you actually say it. And we store it in our brains two separate ways. So you store paradigm the way we would say it orally, and you also store paradigm in your brain so that you know how to spell it. And that's one of the strategies that you do because now we understand with that triangle, that eternal triangle that's constantly working, that that is something you can do and the brain can handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. And, you know, the last thing I'd like to say is that I really do think that spelling is so critical to learn nowadays because, at least for me, one of my biggest frustrations is I love using technology. Technology is an amazing thing and it really helps. But when you're writing an email and even spell check doesn't recognize the word you're trying to say, it is so frustrating. And it happens more often than not that I'm always like, okay,
Yeah.
let's take out this letter. Let's add this letter back in. Let's mix a few letters in between just to try and like figure out how to do it. Because I don't know if it's just me who recognizes this, but there's also a thing with accents that, at least in my
Mm.
opinion, in the Northeast American accent, we sometimes don't pronounce any T's.
Right.
So an example would be like Christmas. There's no
Okay.
T in it, or partnership. No T. I'm not hearing a T. So from what I have auditorily or what I've picked up, there's no T in it. So when I'm going to recall it to spell it, because I sound things out, I'm like, oh, there's no T in this. And very wrong.
Right, exactly. So you need to map it as part and then
Mhm.
ner for that.
Exactly.
For that. And so there are some limitations, I think, for technology, what it can accomplish. And it's almost like we need to have, the foundation. We need to have enough of a foundation established for the spelling that obviously it does help with the reading and the decoding. And one of the things they talk about is there's a kind of a yin yang relationship between spelling and reading. So if reading is decoding and breaking it down, then spelling is encoding and building it up. And we do need to be able to do both. Mm, for that, absolutely. And I would also say, I think that you're fortunate to be living now because spell check didn't exist when I was your age. Spell check, sure, you went to the dictionary, you pulled out the
Oh
Oxford
my gosh.
dictionary that's this thick, and you'd go page by page, and you're like, all right, we'll get to it. You
I
know,
think my nightmare would have been the typewriter and making a
mm,
mistake on that. I just 100%, because I have zero patience. So when I go for it, I'm just like, "Do, do, 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 do," and then I'm like, oh, I'll just fix that at the end. It's not a problem. So, oh my gosh. So
right, there
glad
you
for
go.
technology.
Yes, yes. So technology can help and advance. So, we're with cars and so forth, not just the horse and buggy. And it does play a role. And I'm the first to admit it. Look, my spelling, when I came back from Mexico, was basically non existent in English. I was fortunate that throughout high school, by the time I exited or finished high school, then it had come back and it improved significantly. But I was just spelling everything kind of the way I would sound it out in Spanish. And Spanish is not even as transparent as Italian for that.
Yeah.
So let me say, for recommendations, right? Because we always like to have recommendations on each episode or as much as possible on what you think would help in the future, any recommendations you have for people, for parents listening to this, for older students that might be listening to this, and so forth, as it pertains to spelling and perhaps some of your experiences.
A few things. I mean, if you're younger and you're trying to learn how to spell, I mean, other than really just understanding the rules, if you're, writing things down and trying to spell, definitely for me, it helps so much to have a fidget in my hand or to eat while learning, if that makes sense, to be snacking. I'm a very snacky kind of person. I think that really helps when you're younger, but I think when you're older, I think the best thing to do is to improve your vocabulary. And in order to do that, in order to just see these words and see how people are pronouncing it, in order to become more familiar with it, to eventually be able to spell it by yourself, audiobooks. Find a topic, find something you like, and just go for an audiobook.
There's actually, as you were speaking, there is something. It's called morphology, and it's breaking the words down into your base word or your root word, your prefix, something that you attach to the beginning of the word, and your suffix. Because if you could take a multisyllabic word, so one of the long words, and you can break it down into little pieces, and you know how to pronounce each of the little pieces, right? If you know that miss, the prefix miss means wrong, then when you see it attached to the word, then you're going to box it in, separate it out. It's going to give you a clue on how to pronounce it and so forth. So, really, morphology, learning morphology is one of the things that older students can do to improve their spelling. And it truly works. It really does. It takes time. You got to learn it, but it works.
Yeah, I think the other recommendation, especially with spelling, is that how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? It's such a big topic. And I think for a lot of dyslexic, it can be very overwhelming, especially when you're older. And it can also be a little like degrading having to be taught how to spell, if that makes sense. So I really just think one step at a time, one lesson at a time.
Right. And to persevere through it, that age is it's not about age. It's truly about what you were taught, how you were taught it, and more importantly, has it made its way into long-term memory? Because if it hasn't made its way into long-term memory, it's not sticking. And so you got to keep going back and keep going back until it does stick for that. And so really it's kind of the voice of encouragement to say one step at a time and you will get there. It may just take you a little bit longer, but in the end, you do feel more confident in your abilities. And I think that that's really what it comes down to. You know, you probably won't win a spelling bee, and you know what? That's okay. That's fine for that. Um, Anything else? If not, all right, then I am going to thank everyone for this episode and really encourage people to look into spelling, look into the rules of English and spelling. They actually do exist. You know, I think I read something that there were 150 spelling rules. Okay, so one rule at a time, but you got to start somewhere for that. Looking at morphology, again, being able to break long, difficult words down into the pieces so that you can pronounce it, spell it, and decode it for that. Those are all things, and keep going, persevere. So, with that, thank you, Alex. I really appreciate it. And
Of
until our next
course, I
episode.
appreciate being here.
Alrighty, take care.
All right, bye bye.